So, what is it you think you know about drawing, but you don't? I can tell you straight up what it is because you already know it. Well, at least you think you know it. But I'm very confident that for most of you, you don't know it enough. But you certainly think you know it. However, the evidence tells otherwise. Here's what you think you know. We have to observe carefully what we're drawing before we draw it. Well, of course, we all know that. I told you, you thought you already know it. We all look carefully. You have to. Who wouldn't? But I suspect it's a bit like we also know we should brush our teeth after every meal. Well, of course we should brush our teeth after every meal because that's going to get us to the healthy teeth that we want to have. We all know we should, but much of the time we don't, and for some people, more than others. But going back to drawing, why am I so confident that so many people don't really observe their references, whether it's in front of them or in a photo, carefully enough? And it's because of how so often our drawings look. Let's look at this example. I've pared the drawing down to bare bones to make it a little more obvious the sorts of details I see over and over and over again, which don't come down, I believe, to poor drawing technique, but to inadequate observation. So, for instance, the first thing I usually check for is the perspective angles. And so a rather obvious one is that the top of this building, which slopes down slightly, the perspective angle slopes down, has just been done straight across. Because it's a slight slope, it's not been perceived as being a slope. Now, it's an easy detail to miss if we're not looking for it because it's not too far off the horizontal. But all of these details missed out in our drawing, or drawn incorrectly is a better way of putting it, add up to a drawing that not just doesn't look quite like our reference, but doesn't quite look like anything real at all. Let's look at some of the other angles. This is a very obvious angle for our building, and we've looked at it. We've known that there's an angle, that we've put an angle, and it slopes down, such as this one. But when we compare those angles, that's the line that we should have had. The other thing we've done is we've looked and seen, okay, well, there's a wall here that comes down. And so we've drawn, there are 4 windows. So there are 4 windows here. But we haven't looked carefully enough to see, okay, well, how wide is this wall compared to what we've already drawn? Assuming we drew this section first. And if we look at this corner of the wall here, which is this line here. Now, I haven't even observed that this porch comes out a bit because the color is all quite similar. I've not seen that, in fact, this wall ends here. And so this is the distance, and it's about maybe half the distance of the total distance across here. So maybe this would be this far, maybe not even that much. So this wall should have been more like this. Now, obviously, then these windows are in the wrong place, and I've not foreshortened them. They're too much the same size, which makes this wall feel like it's more coming out towards us rather than sloping away from us. And so we lose the sense of this long, narrow, winding pathway. I've seen this building and I've drawn it, and I've not just made the same mistake with the angles, but I haven't carefully enough observed that this building down here angles really about level with our balcony. And at the top, it's still well below this corner. So nothing here is lining up. And yet, once I'd drawn this, I had places I could align all of these details, but I haven't observed them carefully enough. I've looked and gone, oh yes, there's a sloping roof. I've drawn a sloping roof. Oh yes, there's another building there. I've drawn that. And of course, this line here is also way off. It should be more like this. And then we would have had our nice winding road. Look at these plant stands. Instead of drawing something that looks closer to what we actually have here, we've gone, oh, I know how they look. and we've drawn a similar type of thing, but not quite from the same position. And so we draw something that's similar, but not just does it not look like our reference, it actually doesn't have the same perspective as the rest of the scene. And even details such as when I first drew this and put the balcony in and I was putting this door in, then I should have seen that the door really is just a bit over, if that's halfway, just a bit over halfway. But I've made my door way too high and too wide for the proportions that I need to have it look the way it needs to look. These are all the details that we need to see. This retaining wall here, where the land slopes down, the angle is that. I've actually made that angle too steep. I've seen this angle and gone, oh, it comes out like that. And I've just drawn it without actually trying to work out exactly what the angle is. It should be much more like that. This corner here of the building comes in under the balcony. Under the balcony. I may draw this building correct with all the perspective angles correct, and yet I've now got the scale wrong because I didn't line up a key element of the building with something I'd already drawn. These are the sorts of details that careful observation allows us to see and that we miss, thinking that we've got enough information, that we've gathered enough information to draw it accurately when we haven't. We just think we've seen it, or we're half remembering other similar things that we've seen. You see, when our drawings don't look as much like our reference as we would like them to, I think what most people do is they think, I need to improve my drawing skills. I don't have enough drawing skills. I need to improve how I draw my lines. But I would say that the problem is not that we lack adequate skills to draw the lines. The problem is we haven't seen what we've needed to have seen adequately in the first place when we've observed our reference to know what sort of line to draw and where to draw it. We haven't seen enough that we can hold it accurately from reference to paper. I think quite often we try and observe too much all at once. And we think we've taken it in, and this is a particular problem if we're very familiar with the subject that we're drawing. But our drawings show that in fact we were guessing with quite a lot of our line work with its placement and how we were making it look. And that all these guesses, not quite right, added up makes a drawing that doesn't look quite right. Another way I have a good idea that the problem is not lack of technique, lack of drawing skills and such, is because I've had quite a large number of drawing students, many of whom have very good technical skills and very good understanding of line and line control and line placement in general. And yet I look at their drawings as I critique them, and over I see errors that spoil the realism of the drawing which it would otherwise have, that can only come down to they haven't observed carefully enough what they were drawing to be able to draw it. It certainly wasn't their general level of technical skills and line drawing ability and so forth. These are not beginners. These are people with a fair amount of drawing experience behind them. But for all that they've learned how to draw, for all their drawing skills, they haven't yet learned adequately how to observe the things they need to observe to draw those subjects accurately. And the proof is in the drawings. But it's not just perspective angles. A lot of the issues are things such as, say, chimneys, where when I look at the reference and I look at the drawing, the chimney is, say, taller than the surrounding architectural elements, and yet on the reference it's the same height or perhaps shorter. Now the chimney may be relatively well drawn. It's not the lack of drawing skills. And I think the issue is we see something in our reference or in front of us that is familiar, possibly very familiar, and we think, oh, I know what that is. I know what that looks like. And then we start drawing it. And there's a big difference between knowing what something is well enough to recognize it if we see it, and to know it well enough to be able to draw all the parts of it accurately. So I might have looked at this chimney in my reference and gone, I know what a chimney looks like and I start to draw it. But what I haven't observed is I haven't observed where this chimney lines up with the other architectural elements around it, whether it's above or below or equal. And quite possibly I haven't observed the detail on this particular chimney. Maybe there's a line of brickwork that juts out slightly just below the top. Or maybe there are some angled bricks either protruding out or angled as a pattern within the surface. And these are the details I would have noticed if I'd looked more carefully at my reference. If I'd examined all the various parts of a subject you need to examine to be able to be sure, to be confident that we can then accurately draw it on the paper. And of course, there's only so many points that we can observe carefully in one go, hold in our head, and then accurately put on the paper. Which means, of course, to observe carefully will take more time and more effort. And I think sometimes the problem is we just haven't appreciated how much effort, how much hard work, how much commitment and energy good drawing is. It's not just the skills, but it's the effort and the energy and the attention, the intent to put those skills into practice every time. Well, at least every time we want a good drawing. But going back to our chimney, instead of observing carefully, full of enthusiasm to progress our drawing, and with a generic chimney-looking shape swirling round in our head, it's no surprise that we go on to draw a, generic-looking chimney. Everyone can see it's a chimney. And if we haven't made errors with the perspective angles, there may not look anything particularly wrong with it, but often the details we haven't seen are the details that not just give our scene realism, such as correct angles, but interest. We lose the details that make this particular chimney this particular chimney. But of course, we'd looked at our reference, we thought we'd seen it adequately, and then we went and drew it. And we think we've drawn it as well as we can because we've used whatever drawing skills we have, but we didn't realize we hadn't seen our subject enough to be able to apply those skills to get a realistic result. And so, believing we need more drawing skills or there must be some tips or hacks we don't know that will make the difference, we spend time and effort in directions that quite possibly we don't need to go down at all, and never address the fundamental issue with how our drawings look, that we haven't seen carefully enough what we're drawing to be able to draw it. Although, of course, we may actually need to improve our drawing skills as well. Let's not rule that out. But that will never fix the problems in our drawing that are caused by lack of careful observation. Many of you have probably heard of and even done that drawing exercise where we get a reference photo, we place it upside down and we draw it upside down. And best of all is if someone else gets the reference photo for us, chooses it for us, and we only ever see it upside down until we've drawn our upside down version. And then we turn them both around the right way and get to compare how well we draw when we draw upside down. I first came across this exercise reading the book Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain in the early 1980s. And I've done this exercise with many groups in many different contexts, and invariably mostly with people who don't draw, certainly wouldn't see themselves as artists. And they're always amazed, and I'm always amazed at how well they draw, particularly because I always use portraits. I always use drawings of portraits upside down for them to copy upside down, because portraits generally are more challenging to draw because we're more demanding with how a face has to look. There's not so much room to make mistakes in our line work or where we place things before it starts to look seriously not quite right. And the question is, how can all these people who don't draw, who certainly wouldn't call themselves artists, but really often haven't drawn since school, produce such great portrait drawings? And the answer is that because the reference photo that they're copying from is upside down, it scrambles the information of what the face looks like just enough that it's not so familiar, that they can't go, oh yes, I know what that is. And they have to look much more carefully at the reference. They have to go slower. They have to draw smaller parts. They're looking back and forth from the reference to the paper, from the reference to the paper far more frequently. And despite their lack of drawing skills, they often finish up with really an excellent portrait that might be the first thing they've drawn in 20, 30, 40 years, whenever they left school. And if you've never done this exercise yourself, it is really fun to try, and I can recommend you give it a go. Not, oh wow, that's surprisingly good for an upside down drawing. No, that's a surprisingly good drawing. So if our problem is that we're not observing carefully enough, how then should we observe? How then can we observe? What should we be doing when we're observing to get the information we need to draw our subject accurately? It's not an easy task to try and persuade people who think they're already observing carefully enough for their drawing that perhaps they aren't. But I hope I've at least caused you to consider maybe you're not seeing everything that you need to see for a successful drawing. That perhaps you've been blaming your drawing skills unfairly, and it's not the lack of ability to draw, but it's knowing precisely enough what's needing to be drawn. I've always been aware this was such an important issue that this was the topic of some of my earliest videos. In fact, I made a series of 4 videos, Observation for Drawing Success, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I've now put them together on a playlist, and I'll put a link to this playlist in the description. So why not go and have a look if you think possibly you've been unfairly blaming your drawing skills, when more critical, more intentional, more tailored observation is actually what's been holding back your drawings having the effect that you want. So why not check out those 4 videos? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this challenging. I hope you found it challenging enough to even consider that it could be true for you. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.